Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here with you this morning and representing the BNZ team. And obviously great to be here last night. When I accepted the invitation to come along, I thought, well, it's a fantastic opportunity to catch up with John Key. As he and I become good friends. Obviously, I wasn't able to do that. Well, I can, but he's got a new life. And at the same time, I saw that it was right after the final legislate test, and I thought, well, that's great because I'll be able to sit here and say how dreadful are the Wallabies. But actually, let's talk about that. I mean, what a great thing. So anyway, so I'm as surprised as anyone, but obviously delighted to be back in Wellington. And certainly I want to congratulate Infrastructure New Zealand and John and the whole board and the team. Incredibly important to come together as you are. The organisation in New South Wales, which is obviously connected across the country, Infrastructure Partnerships Australia, played a pivotal role in what we did, helping to shape public policy, helping to provide an understanding of what was required, how to do it, various options. So it's great that you have done this, and I really agree that this is a pivotal time. And obviously, we wish the new government every success, and certainly from our point of view, we'll be looking to engage and provide constructive solutions. So I wanted to run through very quickly just a couple of ideas in terms of how do you deal with some of the challenges in infrastructure. And it is a challenge, and it's not just a challenge here, but it's across the world. At the moment, you can see there is a very supportive macro environment. That is, there is a need for a lot of infrastructure. Population growth across the world is obviously growing at record rates. There is an emerging middle class which adds to the need for more productive assets. I mean, look at China and India. The expectation is 400 to 500 million going into the middle class over the next 20 years. A huge shift, but requirement for infrastructure. Existing infrastructure is ageing, and that vision last night of that bridge under the bridge is a good example of ageing infrastructure, not necessarily the right approach, but a good example of what is happening. In addition to government budgets which are constrained, and that is a fiscal reality that is facing every jurisdiction, increasing constraints around budget of governments. The market here, so Australia and New Zealand collectively, sort of sits number 3 in terms of the size of the infrastructure market. So what has happened and what is going. So it is a huge market. Obviously, Australia has gone through a significant upgrade, but it does mean that there are skills and capability across these markets and a willingness to adapt various different models. The need is huge. If you look at what is expected over the next 25 years, the global infrastructure is about $3.7 trillion a year. That's just to keep pace with existing growth and upgrade existing assets. In Asia, it's about $2. In Europe and the US, it's effectively $500 billion a year. And down here in Oceania, it's about $79 billion. A significant amount of infrastructure is needed. And with governments constrained, we need to deal with that. Obviously, clients, super funds, which are continuing to look for infrastructure assets, they are following that across the world. So as the needs are unearthed, projects are built, we're seeing sort of our clients across our group start to go to all parts of the world to support those. This just gives an example of the problem with governments. So global government debt continues to rise. Post the global financial crisis, they stepped in. There's obviously less capacity that governments have to deal with shocks. Their credit ratings have fallen. There is a limitation on what governments can do, and that is from one end of the globe to the other, which is why this infrastructure challenge, more infrastructure required against that backdrop, means we have to be more innovative. So one solution, and Paul's right, I'm not advocating this is the only solution, it's just a case study as you consider a range of options on how you actually deliver the infrastructure that you require. And this is one, which is what we adopted. So in coming to power, so I came into politics 2007, we got into government in 2011, so 4 years later. And you have that moment, which is, you hear people talk about, there's red books and blue books. So if you win government, well, I got a blue book, but you open it up and say, you know, congratulations, you are Treasurer of New South Wales, and then the next line is commiserations, you are Treasurer of New South Wales. So it wasn't a great position to inherit, and that's you can't pick your time, but that's what we faced. We faced significant deficits. So over a forward estimates periods, we had deficits of about $8 billion. We had the highest unemployment rate in the country, despite being the largest state. We had underperformed for 10 years. We had the lowest economic growth. We had net debt up to about 32%. We had our credit rating on watch and an infrastructure backlog of $30 billion. So with no real capacity to borrow anymore, if you want to maintain the highest possible rating, and I think that is incredibly important, particularly seen during the global financial crisis. You have no capacity in terms of operating budget, what to do. And that was the challenge that we faced. And we were determined, coming into government, we had watched for 10 years, and it seems part of the experience in New Zealand, waiting for the infrastructure to be built, and we were determined that we must do it. So we looked at the other option. Before we did that, though, this is an incredibly important thing, and I hope this becomes a legacy for the state. Rather than have politicians decide what projects we should do, we said, how about we have an independent body that actually gets the best expert advice and creates a pipeline on the basis of economics and rigour. It sounds a common sense approach, but hadn't been done. That was a long process, took about 18 months, but effectively we then, at the end of that, had a 20-year priority list. And from an infrastructure sector point of view, very clear. Here's what the priorities were in roads. Here's what the priorities were in public transport. Here's what the priorities were in actually education, health and cultural assets. We included all of that to create a very clear understanding and a message to the private sector. This is what we're going to do in the next 3 to 4 years, but here's the long 20-year plan. Now, why that's important, the longer-term plan, it enabled us to engage with the private sector, and we had a project which was the F3 to M2, for those that know Sydney. That was a project expected to go in years 10 to 15, but there was an innovative solution that came forward on the private sector, knowing it was there, that brought it right to the front. We were able to do that at the same time as everything. So that's the other benefit that comes with the priority. We also ensured that we had delivery skills, delivering the projects in the right way to world-class standards, and assurance that went with that, and also the funding. So we thought if we have any surplus tax revenue that came in, so you'd budget for a certain amount of tax revenue, if there was any that came in above it, we said we're going to take that and put it into the infrastructure fund, and we're also going to start the asset recycling, and every single dollar of that is going to go into the infrastructure fund. So you started to have a fund alongside the priorities, and the theory was, well, that will enable us for the next generation to set ourselves up. So how do you fund it? And that's where we got to the context. If you can't borrow and you haven't got the operating capacity, the best way to deal with that is to look at the balance sheet. And there was a number of assets we had on our balance sheet, and we went systematically about it. And at the moment, globally, it is an incredible time in terms of the weight of money that is looking for more yield. Infrastructure as an asset class is getting increasing allocations. There is almost a competitive tension that delivers great results for existing owners of those assets that can take those proceeds and invest it. So we went through a process of a desalination plant, which, by the way, the moment the decision was made to start building it, it pretty much didn't rain again for the next 10 years, but we've got one. The port of Newcastle and Botany. There was some electricity generators we worked on, but the significant one was the poles and wires. And the other benefit that comes with this is not just the assets, but there's microeconomic reform. The inefficiency within that body had seen real costs over a 10-year period grow by close to 100% when private sector comparators were actually zero or less than zero. So it is a good example where there's microeconomic reform and assets came. We went to the election on that, and we also, in the bottom, went to the federal government and said, well, if we undertake this, are you going to incentivise us because we think this is great for state and nation? And Joe Hockey, as a treasurer, did that. So he created an additional fund to give incentives to other states to actually undertake this, and we took proceeds as well. Now, the important point is, it's not just to tick the box, we're going to lease these assets. We'd seen this before. What we wanted to do was understand from a public perception that there is benefit that comes with this. It comes straight to you. So if we lease the port, well, we are going to improve your travel home by 10 to 15 minutes. We're going to build this road. And creating that narrative, I think, is incredibly important if this is something that would be considered. And collectively, we're able to leverage it. So the WestConnex project, which is, there are effectively two major motorways in the west of Sydney, the M4 and M5, we've connected those. They have clogged, ineffective, they're being expanded, connected. We were able to make a grant to that out of the proceeds of some of the assets, but it's a $16.9 billion project. So we are a grant from us, a grant from the Commonwealth Government, and then we have gone to the private sector to actually help to fund that as well. So it's not just taking the grant and building something, you can leverage it. So, you know, over $50 billion in assets here have been leveraged to more than $100 billion over the next generation. So that's exciting. The metro rail is something that we've needed. The sports infrastructure, it's actually a competitive requirement, I mean, as we know here in New Zealand. But you can, there are strong economics, not as strong as others, but there's still strong economics there. Health and schools similarly. So that package was something that I think was powerful, and people hadn't really connected the two before, but really that was what gave us a sense of this is something that's good for everyone. Economic reform, lower costs, hopefully in the electricity as an example, and all of these proceeds. And otherwise they just don't get invested. Something like the Opera House hadn't been invested in 20 years, a significant tourist icon not invested. Overall, it delivered more benefits because the context is, as you know, in the infrastructure, there are economic uplift. The expectation is over the 20 years that our economic improvement will be about 6% in terms of the GDP number. So it's a huge shift that comes. In the election, there was actually a debate around that, and you know, my opponent said it's not 6, it's 4%, and I said, okay, well, it's a 4% uplift, so you can have that. But it is in evidence, as we're seeing today. You're seeing significant cranes. We got quite excited about a crane index. I felt quite tragic in that, but maybe in this room people will get excited by that as well. Looking at the cranes, and there's more than double the cranes in New South Wales there is across the rest of the country, and you can see it as you come into the city. But employment growth is up, GDP growth is up, and the economy is now the strongest in Australia. So there's not only a benefit of building the infrastructure, there's an economic benefit that comes with that. And then at the same time, this was the budget coverage this year. That's an interesting cover, that one. But these are the team that succeeded me, the Premier and Treasurer, and the budget's never been stronger because with the economic growth comes additional revenues that are flowing, and this will happen and is locked in for the next sort of 4 or 5 years. So as a package, if you think trying to convince or talk to public policymakers, well, you can build infrastructure, you can have microeconomic reform, more productivity, you can have a stronger economy and a stronger budget. And I think that package is something that makes it certainly worth talking about. So the last point is New Zealand. Clearly there is an opportunity here. And the numbers are compelling. Ageing infrastructure, there's about $80 billion needed over the next 20 years. I mean, that is a significant ask. In the population, about 50% of the population growth over the next 20 years, I think, is in Auckland or close to thereabouts. And I know the council is here and they have a challenge. So really, it's how do you deal with that? How do you fund the infrastructure that's going to be required? There's a range of opportunities that's up to you, but as I said last night, and I won't name who it was, but someone from the council was saying, look, I don't think people go home at night and just clap their hands and think, thank goodness I still own the port. This is just awesome. That's the sort of debate you have. I mean, with the poles and wires, I said, look, I don't think that when people go home at night, they look at that telegraph pole at the end of their street and go and give it a hug and say, thank goodness I still own this. I don't want that leased, I want to hang on to it. But, as I used to say it, I said, but I do know that if their child is sick, they want the best possible hospital they can. They don't want a 50-year hospital. They want the most modern hospital with the best facilities to support our staff. And, you know, that's part of the way I think you can shape the narrative. So as a package, looking at the case study of New South Wales, and again, I'm not saying that this is the perfect way to do it, but it is just one potential option that I think is worth considering, and I'm very happy to engage with the new government on it. But now, New South Wales, it's got a 4.6% unemployment rate. Our AAA credit rating was confirmed and it was upgraded during the period of this. We have net debt, well actually cash of $8 billion, a strong budget and infrastructure funded for a generation. So, you know, I think the state is in good hands. It's in a very strong position. And importantly, infrastructure is not just about tick the box. It's a difference it makes to people's lives. Whether it be faster commute home, whether it be better facilities in our health system, whether it be more public transport options, it is something that makes a difference to people's lives, and that's what drove us. So appreciate the chance to talk to you today. So thank you very much.